We're at it again. I'm hoping that this can be a really good tool for you guys so you can learn the game of football, both parents and players, so that when we get on the practice field, it'll make things a lot easier. All right, so now we're talking about defense, which, to be really honest, is pretty much my favorite topic there is. So I'm going to try and not overload you with too much information, but just enough so that you know what's going on a little bit better when we start practicing on August 2nd. So when we're running defense, we're going to run what's called a 4-4 defense, as you see at the top. What that simply means is there's 4 down linemen. The R is called a rush end. The T is a tackle. The N is a nose. And the E on this side, on the weak side, is our end. So when we say strong or weak, all that means is if the ball's in the middle of the field, because most quarterbacks are right-handed, we're going to be strong left, and that's exactly what we're showing here. If the ball's on a hash mark, as you see here, that means there's going to be a wider side of the field than the other. So if the ball was on this hash mark, this side would have more space, so we would call that strong left. If the ball was on this hash mark, the right side would have more space, so we would call that strong right. I expect the linebackers to be able to communicate that right away once we break the huddle, where the strength is. Now there's 4 linebackers. That's why this is called a 4-4. So there's 4 guys up front and 4 behind. And so these are called your Sam, your Zach, your Mac, and your Will linebacker. These guys are all going to be 5 yards from the line of scrimmage. The Sam and the Will, our 2 outside linebackers, are going to be outside of their defensive ends. And the Mac and the Zach are going to be lined up right over the guards. Our corner on the outside is going to move wherever the wide receiver is, either to the strong side of the field, or in this case, we're in the middle of the field at strong left because there's a flanker out here. There's a wide receiver that needs to be covered. Your corner is going to line up 5 yards deep and 1 yard inside of this outside receiver. Now, we call this white coverage because that means it's cover 0, which means there's 0 free people in the middle of the field to help on any deep passing plays. So the way we're covering this is we're going really heavy to stop the run here, which I think is a wise move in our league because there'll be more running than there will be passing. So we've got nobody deep in the middle of the field. That means the particular technique that we have to play in terms of coverage means that we can't let anybody cross our face to the middle of the field. But I'll talk about coverage in a minute. Right now we're going to focus on the run. The way that we're set up, the rush end's going to have 1 arm's length reach outside of the tight end. So he should be lined up a little bit wider, probably on the screen here. And he's responsible for a gap. Everybody's responsible for a gap, as you can see with the arrows here. The gaps go like this. Between the center and the guard is called the A gaps. So these are the A gaps here. Between the guard and the tight end is the B gaps, and just outside of the tight end is our C gaps. So A, B, C, and that happens on both sides, A, B, C. So the defensive ends, both our rush and our end, they're responsible for these C gaps, which means they have contain, which also means that the ball should never get outside of them. So we'll talk about technique once we get on the field, but just know for now that these defensive ends are responsible for these C gaps out here. Now our tackle, because he's lined up shaded on the outside shoulder of the guard, he's going to be responsible for this B gap here. Our nose is going to line up on the inside eye of the center here, so that makes it force a double team here by the guard in the center, and he's going to be responsible for this weak A gap. The strong A gap is going to be open. There's no down lineman directly in the gap, and the weak B gap is going to be open. There's no down lineman directly in that gap. So the job of this defensive end on the weak side is a little bit tougher because he has to actually hit this tackle or tight end and squeeze this B gap down. Now these linebackers back here, besides having pass responsibilities, when it comes to the run, our outside linebackers are always going to have the D gap, which is the outside gap that's outside of the tight end, and really these guys can't let the ball get outside of them. They have to make a lot of tackles in the run game. The Mac is going to have the nearest open inside gap, which in this case is the B gap. The Zach is going to have the nearest open inside gap to him, which in this case is going to be the strong A gap. And again, our Sam is going to have outside D gap responsibility. So all you got to remember in terms of the run game is when the ball comes to your side, this player on the outside has to come up and force the runner back inside to his help. If the ball goes outside to this linebacker has to come up and force the ball back inside. Okay, this corner, in terms of run responsibilities, he's only going to have responsibility for run once this receiver comes up and tries to block him. He's got to make sure he leaves that receiver inside and comes outside, and he hears run and sees the running back cross the line of scrimmage. Otherwise, he's got to cover this guy man to man the entire time. We'll talk more about how to recognize that later, but here's our basic run defense. So what's going to happen, I'll draw up a little bit later, I'll draw up a run play versus it, and then I can show you how it works. But here's how the gaps will work, is that on the snap of the ball, the linemen will step to their gaps, and our linebackers will step to their gaps. And then depending upon where the ball goes, we'll adjust accordingly.